Hey folks, Toby here, and this is going to be another video in the series how to Jebus Outcast, how to play in one hero template in Heroes Free. And now that I've already overviewed in these series like the generic basics, like the secondary skills that are good or bad and are, slippers category, we'll be going through each faction one by one. So for a bit of context, throughout these videos, I'll be referring to sort of their tier list, like how people usually rate each faction compared to another. I think I'll edit it somewhere on the screen, there, whatever. So yeah, that's just a bit of context. And in these following videos about each faction I'll be explaining why they are rated as such, what's so good about them, what's so bad about them, and how you usually end up playing those, I suppose. So yeah, in this video we'll be talking about Dungeon is a very weird faction, to be honest, and it's one of the few factions that I'm still personally feeling very uncomfortable with, despite, playing at this point hundreds of Jebus Outcast games on this version alone, tens of Dungeon games on this version alone. But, I still don't feel like I've cracked, what makes a good Dungeon game, what is required, how do you approach it? And I think it's sort of like the best example I could give. It's Dungeon is very similar to Inferno, but at the same time extremely different from Inferno. So the similarity is that both Dungeon and Inferno, you have a lot of flexibility as to how you want to play the game. Do you want to build, a power stack of Pit Lords, Pit Fiends, Ifriti, or Devils? Same applies to Dungeon. You can build, any power stack, really. You can also go for box gaming in both cases with both Inferno and Dungeon. However, with Inferno, regardless of what you go for, you will most likely end up with a pretty decent game. However, with Dungeon, despite Inferno and Dungeon being kind of rated similarly by most people, Inferno just a bit higher but not by much, with Dungeon there's no consistency. You can have amazing games and snowball completely out of control, like no other faction. But you can also have absolute garbage games. And I'm not sure exactly how, on week one, sometimes it feels like you're having a really good game, but it turns out to be just hot garbage. So I'm not sure. It's if I had to describe this faction in a sentence, I would say, decent, but extremely inconsistent. With that out of the way, this general intro, let's go, just like with any other faction, let's go through heroes first before jumping into the gameplay. So for Dungeon, you actually have a caster hero that is oftentimes played and oftentimes preferred, which is Deemer. So the thing about Deemer is that he has quite a few things going for him. First of all, he starts with scouting, which is, scouting, in my opinion, is one of the three best skills to start with: offense, armor, and scouting. I'm not sure which one I prefer to start out with. It's just that good. It's really great skill throughout the entire game. On top of all of that, you have the Meteor Shower specialty. So you start with Meteor Shower. And the synergy that Meteor Shower has with Dungeon is obviously Mana Vortex. So if you Mana Vortex up, if you level a bit into Knowledge, pick up some spell power, you can just go throughout the entire map, just Meteor Showering everything down. You can take Dragon Dwellings, you can take Minotaur Dwellings with it, you can take, big boxes on day 1 or day 3 just with the help of Meteor Shower, which is really awesome. Then, in the bunker fight, Meteor Shower is oftentimes the best spell to cast compared to anything else. Maybe Chain Lightning could be on the same on par, but even then, Chain Lightning is a bit limiting. You often hit your own units, so Meteor Shower is usually the preferred cast in the bunker, when fighting the bunker guards. So all around, a really solid pick. As for Mighty Heroes, you also have a few choices. Some people go with Damacon, just because of advanced offense. Specialty 350 gold is Not really much. It doesn't really do anything, but you start with advanced offense, which is pretty amazing, allowing you to take reasonably tough fights. So some people just go with this for a proper skill tree, just guaranteeing or increasing the odds of having a really solid secondary skill tree. And lastly, we have Days. So this guy has the specialty of Minotaurs, which is pretty huge. The most common strategy of all, or the most common gameplay of all for dungeon, involves a Minotaur power stack. So specialty Minotaurs is really good. You also start with offense. Tactics has some kind of nice synergy, because with dungeon, since you have both tier 3 and tier 4 ranged units, you also don't have like the speed advantage. Like most of your units, except for cats and dragons, are kind of slow. So tactics does allow you to position properly. So there is some synergy there for taking the earlier fights a bit easier. So yeah, like these three heroes, I would say, are more or less like equally played between the people. I don't think there's a heavy favorite. I think maybe like Deemer is harder to play if you end up betting gold for dungeon, and you start with less than 10k gold, then it's kind of hard to build up everything that you want. Maybe in those cases Deemer is a bit worse, but even then, like with less gold, the same applies to other heroes. With Deemer, at least you have the meteor shower. Regardless of the gold, you'll be able to do some stuff on the map. So I don't know, it's like, I would say they're completely equal choices. And that more or less wraps up the heroes. Let's get into the actual gameplay now. Just like with any other faction, you have the main question that you want to answer, which is, what kind of army are you going for? Whether it's box gaming or dwelling gaming. And in dungeon, just like something like Inferno, you have like both options really. They're completely, I would say, equal in my eyes. It completely depends on the biome that you get. If you see some amazing tempo, like in this case, 50 to 99 zombies, if you can take them and then snowball into, some bigger boxes, maybe, well, this might be a bit too hard, but maybe pack of pit fiends, for example, maybe a horde of griffins. If you can snowball into that, then, why bother with the dwellings? But on the other hand, if you have, just amazingly placed dwellings, like for example, there's one Manticore lair, 2, 3, all nearby, well, sort of, you can go for that as well and, just build your power stack. Both gameplays are completely viable. It 100% depends on what kind of biome you get. The difference, I would say, in, your week 1 is obviously depending on whether you go for Deemer and you play with the gimmick of the meteor shower, or you play with a might hero. If you're playing with a might hero, then it's really, really straightforward. On day 1, you just build Pillar of Ice, you buy out the army, and then you go out and, search for fights. You're searching for a few boxes, you do one box, another box, and then, either snowball out of it, or you go flag some dwellings like labyrinths. If you're playing Deemer, often case, you will immediately start heading towards your second town on day 1. So on day 1, you still build Pillar of Ice, you buy out the entire army, and then you start making your way towards your secondary town. By the time you're at the secondary town, you want to achieve like a few things, and this is again specific for Deemer. You first want to level up a few times, so you would get some power and some knowledge. And you also want to build up Mage Guild plus Mana Vortex. So that's immediately once you reach this town, you Mana Vortex up, and then you're able to take some big fights. So ideally, you go towards there, maybe pick a fight or two on the way there just to be able to use up your mana. Like in this case, this is not a very good example, but actually if I was Deemer, the first thing I would do is I would attack these zombies, use up my mana, use up my meteor shower once, hopefully take this box down, then start making my way down to my secondary town, Mana Vortex up there, and then look to take tougher fights. In this case, there's no tougher fights over here. Maybe I would go up, maybe I would flag the Dragon Cave, and, start playing off of that. So that's typically how you kind of approach the game. Now, there are a few sort of caveats to dungeon, sort of specifics to dungeon. One thing worth mentioning is that overlords, so, you know, the might heroes, the caster heroes are warlocks, the might heroes are overlords. Overlords cannot level into water magic. That means if you take, whenever you're offered a school of magic and you take it, you're pretty much 100% guaranteed every single game to have air, earth, schools of magic. There will pretty much never be a game where you're just fucked, completely just fucked in the late game, literally have to GG out despite your stats, despite your army, just because you don't have one of those two schools of magic. So that's one thing, just like barbarians, I suppose. The other thing is that you have an amazing building. I mean, Anamortix is an amazing building. It helps the might heroes as well quite a bit. But the other amazing building is Portal of Summoning, which you usually want to utilize quite a bit. A very common strategy, which again depends on the biome, is that you flag a building, like let's say a labyrinth, or you flag a dragon cave, then build 2 of those portals of summoning, and 1-to-1 you collect the army from your side town through Portal of Summoning, then make your way to your main, collect the army from Portal of Summoning there, and now you have, you know, a pretty reasonable power stack regardless of what kind of dwelling you went. So what you need to keep in mind is that unlike other factions, you don't want to be flagging tier 1 dwellings or tier 2 dwellings just to kind of get you going, because it can really fuck your entire week too. Like if you flag this, you know, Warren, whatever the fuck this is, and then flag a labyrinth, you only have 50% chance to be able to summon the right monster, the right creature from your Portal of Summoning, which you really don't want. You just don't want to take chances with this. So be very careful, just don't go into, you know, autopilot and flagging, you know, like tier 1 building. Because in just about any other faction, if I saw, you know, a horde of zombies on day 1, what I would be looking to do is getting just a bit of like something, you know, like this building would be exactly a little bit of something that I'd be looking for just to be able to take this fight and then snowball out of it. But in this case, specifically as dungeon, you cannot do that. Unfortunately, you have to look for something extra, something somewhere else. A meteor shower might be very well enough to be able to do this fight. I'm not sure, like it depends. If it's 99 zombies, probably not. If it's 50, that's more than enough. Maybe you would like a few treasure chests. If you level into Earth Magic, like it immediately becomes so much better. Right, so that is Portal of Summoning. There's like another thing worth mentioning, which is the build path. Why Portal of Summoning is usually even like the preferred strategy. Like ideally, if you go for dwellings, obviously you want to get Portal of Summoning plus whatever dwelling you flagged in your main on week 1. However, here's the thing. Minosaurs are extremely hard to build. You need 10 diamonds, which is quite a bit. Then you also need Chapel of Still Voice, which is 10 ore plus 10 ore if you're building something like Mage Guild to take advantage of Vortex, or if you're building Portal of Summoning, that's a lot of ore. So very resource intensive. If you're going for Manticores, it doesn't really get easier. You now need Sulfur and Mercury, so those are also sort of hard to come by. You can do like a Medusa store, I suppose, but on week 1 it might be too tough. Same goes for this, like Nagabanks obviously are a great source of gems, however doing that on week 1 is very unrealistic. If you go for dragons, then like good luck building that, like really good luck building that. So in many cases when people do go and flag dragon caves, they will never build tier 7 dwelling in their main. They will just go off of Portals of Summoning, and then they will hope to transition into some sort of utter power stack in the late game through diplomacy, pretty much. Diplomacy and the boxes in the middle. So dwellings are usually pretty hard to build, and I think this is where sort of the inconsistency comes from the dungeon. Because, you know, dwellings are hard to build, so you won't be always able to build them and, you know, just severely detrimenting the source of army that you get. the income of army that you get. However, if you go for boxes, like these creatures, you know, tier 1 to tier 5, apart from troglodytes, which I think are pretty atrocious, you don't get an absurd amount of them. Like, you get a lot of them from boxes, but not absurd. They're really slow. They don't hit that hard. Like, they hit okay, but like, they don't have health. They just die so fast. It's like, I don't know, like, they just don't do anything well. The other creatures, they're kind of okay, but they're not amazing. You know, harpies are not like papashkas or zombies, which you get a ton of, and they can just easily single-handedly tank utopias. Evil Eyes, like, yeah, they do some damage, but like Grand Elves do a lot more. So you're not, you know, thrilled about having a power stack of Evil Eyes. Same kind of for Medusas. Like, for ranged creatures, they're incredibly tanky, I suppose. But then again, like, do you want a Medusa power stack? Like, it's okay, but it's not amazing. And then Minotaurs are kind of nice, but they're also not the best tier 5 creature. Like, I would much rather have Gorgons than Minotaurs. So they're not, like, Dungeon just doesn't have anything where they excel at. And because their boxes are like pretty wonky, especially if you mistake a few boxes, like you think, let's say you assume that this box is 100% Minotaurs, but it ends up being Medusas. Like, then what? You're just going to have like a variety of army, basically. We'll have a bit of Evil Eyes, a bit of Medusas, a bit of Minotaurs. What's your power stack? Those games just, like, they don't go that well. If you could reliably have a power stack, a good power stack of Minotaurs, I think Dungeon would do so much better. But again, like, I'm personally still confused about this faction. I don't think it's that great. I would actually say that it's a bit overrated by people, but that might be just my, you know, incompetence, my inability to play this faction to the fullest. So yeah, like, the boxes are somewhat inconsistent, they're not the most ideal, the dwellings are hard to build, there are a few really nice gimmicks that Dungeon has, especially Deemer, Meteor, Shower, Spam. It's really cool. So overall, like, it's exactly middle tier faction, and I think that more or less sums up my thoughts on the Dungeon. I don't know, give it a shot yourself, let me know what you think. And, you know, we can go from there. So yeah, that's it for this video. Thank you folks for watching. Hope you found it informative. If you have feedback, obviously let me know. Happy to hear from you, and, you know, just have a good day. So yeah, cheers.